Hello, my friends. D.L. Anderson here. Welcome back to Transformation by Truth podcast as we share the truth concerning these last days and what you must do to save yourself from the violent times that are just ahead. Today's podcast is a word of truth accounting of the end times. The end is coming. The end is near. Today's podcast is entitled End Times 290, The Truth About the Great Tribulation, Part 1, The Timing of the Great Tribulation. The podcast's objectives are address matters of ministry housekeeping, harden the power of times and seasons, define the Great Tribulation, and reveal how we guard ourselves from error. This lesson contains timelines and other visuals. Therefore, if you are listening to the podcast, I advise you to watch the video version on our website or YouTube, or request a PDF of the lesson so you can add the visual effect. Ministry housekeeping. Now, I would like to begin this podcast by sharing a few ministry housekeeping matters, so we are all on the same page and you know what to expect as we transition into the next phase of this podcast ministry. First of all, and as you very well know by now, Yahuwah has called me to dedicate the next phase of this podcast ministry to the second sign of the second season in these last days. That is, the renewed nations turning away from lawlessness. As we discussed in the most recent podcast, this turning away from lawlessness is still happening. And yet, seeing as we are in the 11th hour of this season, everything we set our hand to do, we must do quickly. The hour is truly at hand. For that reason, Yahuwah has raised me up to help his people succeed in their full departure from lawlessness. And this is a must if you are to obtain the seal of Elohim, for this is the covenant he has made with his chosen elect to guard us during the time of the great distress. Now, this leads to the second housekeeping item. Namely, I will be changing the format of our podcast ministry in several ways. Firstly, I will go back to posting podcasts on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, while providing assignments on off days, Tuesday, Thursday, and over the weekends. These assignments will not be formal. Rather, they will be specific directions the Spirit leads me to give to you. For example, an assignment could be a certain matter to include in your prayers or to meditate upon. The objective is Yahuwah is leading me to lay a foundation for more intimate engagement with those who are not only following this ministry, but those who may also be leaving Mystery Babel with this ministry, or with a ministry that we are associated with. In either case, Yahuwah's desire is for us to stay connected and on the same spiritual wavelength. And the incorporation of these assignments will guide us in that endeavor. Malachi 3:16 through 18 reads, Then shall those who fear Yahuwah speak often one to another, and Yahuwah listens and hears, and a book of remembrance be written before him of those who fear Yahuwah and those who think upon his name. And they shall be mine, says Yahuwah of hosts, on the day that I prepare a treasured possession, and I shall spare them as a man spares his own son who serves him. Then you shall again see the difference between the righteous and the wrong, between the one who serves Elohim and the one who does not serve him. Brothers and sisters, we are living this word of truth in these last days. Those who truly fear Elohim and are guarding his commands, we are uniting and we are speaking often to each other. Why? Because there is so much at stake and we need each other, for we are truly few in number. And yet, this is why Yahuwah refers to us as his treasured possession. It is also why Yahuwah promises to spare us during the time of the great distress. It is because we are showing the world the difference between the righteous and the wrong by our victory over every degree of lawlessness. This brings me to my third and final housekeeping item. Vis-a-vis, I will begin utilizing this new format with the last two topics in this phase dedicated to analyzing the sealing of these set apart ones. To wit, I will be posting Monday, Wednesday, and Friday starting this week. Now, I trust this is welcome news for those of you who have shared your desire for me to once again begin posting more frequently, for I intend to do just that. And these many meaningful touch points are in line with the prophetic word given to us by Malachi. My dear friends, I am setting the stage for us to speak often one to another. And yet, to ensure that I am not overwhelming this wide audience with too much information by posting 3 times each week, I plan to also migrate back to the early days of our ministry when podcasts were typically 15 to 20 minutes long. As the saying goes, short and sweet is what we seek. To be clear, the teaching portion should last approximately 15 to 20 minutes long. You should also expect a final word, an assignment, ministerial updates, a preview of what is next, and in the future, communications concerning our exodus from Mystery Babel. In any event, I will not quench the spirit just to keep a podcast short. I am only broadcasting my intent, which is to ensure I don't overwhelm this wide audience with too much knowledge without providing the adequate time for everyone to achieve understanding. On that note, I will conclude our ministry updates so we can address the critical topic at hand. That is, the truth you need to know about the Great Tribulation. Let's get started. Find the season. Now, in beginning to reveal the truth about the Great Tribulation, I would like to start by analyzing the timeline below. This is, no doubt, a very familiar timeline to many of you, for I have shared this timeline for the full duration of this end time series. Reason being, this timeline not only reveals the events that will occur in these last days, but it also reveals the events that will not. Case in point, we used this timeline to prove the rapture theory is a false doctrine that has no association with these last days. In this order, we will use this same timeline to prove the following point of interest and the primary objective of this mini-series. The Great Tribulation, i.e., The 7-year period corresponding to Daniel's 70th week will not occur in these last days. We can prove this by going through the same exercise we went through in disproving the rapture theory. To wit, all we have to do is find the season the Great Tribulation would occur in. For if we can find no season, then there is no purpose. There is no reason. Not a sign we should be looking for. Now, before we embark upon this exercise to find the season, we must first consider a scriptural definition for the Great Tribulation. By definition, the Great Tribulation is a 7-year period which Yahushua Messiah prophesies would be the most difficult and violent time of trouble in the history of the world. See Matthew 24:21. Now, the fundamental key to understanding the Great Tribulation is understanding who Yahushua Messiah is talking to. You must appreciate his audience, that is, the people, the 6 of the 7 guidelines of every word of prophecy. Clearly, his audience is the former nation of Israel, a matter which speaks to a key interest point I have made in prior podcasts. Vis-a-vis, Israel is the center of the prophetic universe, and that truth persists unto these last days. Brothers and sisters, the breath of the spirit of prophecy revolves around our people. Therefore, when Yahushua Messiah prophesies concerning the Great Tribulation, he is speaking directly to the disastrous future of the former nation of Israel. They are his audience. They are the people in this word of prophecy. For this cause, we can make a pivotal conclusion concerning the nature of the Great Tribulation, which will lend itself to the timing around this critical event. And I will offer this conclusion in the form of an interest point. The Great Tribulation is not a global tribulation for all nations. Rather, it is a final judgment upon a backslidden people Yahuwah had preordained for destruction. For in addition to their endless backsliding, they orchestrated the death of his only brought forth son. As you can see by the graphic above, the former nation experienced physical death in 70 CE. This year marks the beginning of the siege of Jerusalem, the midpoint of a 7-year war between Israel and Rome. This truth brings us to a sure conclusion of these matters, which I will state at this time and confirm afterwards. The 7-year war between Israel and Rome is the Great Tribulation. It is Daniel's 70th week. This truth brings us to one of the most important revelations of these last days, namely, the Great Tribulation has already occurred. Ergo, it will not occur in these last days. It is not a sign of the end times we should be looking for it, like many end times events, has already passed. We guard ourselves from error. Now, here again, I will confirm this truth throughout this mini-series dedicated to the revelation of the Great Tribulation. To begin with, I would like to analyze the opening line in Daniel's 70 weeks prophecy. Consider this. Daniel 9:24 reveals 70 weeks are decreed for your people and for your set apart city, to put an end to the transgression and to set a seal upon sins and to cover the lawless deeds and to bring in everlasting righteousness and to set a seal upon vision and prophecy and to anoint the most set apart. Brothers and sisters, Daniel clearly reveals from the start that this prophecy is decreed for the former nation of Israel and the holy city. Look, this line gives us the key to unlock the remainder of this prophecy. Without controversy, the former nation of Israel was destroyed by 73 CE at the conclusion of their failed rebellion against the Roman Empire. And thus, 73 CE marks the end of Daniel's 70th week, while giving us the end marker for the Great Tribulation. Now, the timeline below reveals all the major events of Daniel's 70 weeks prophecy, from the command to restore Jerusalem to its destruction and the beginning of the dispersion. For the sake of time, I will not cover this timeline in depth. However, I would encourage you to bookmark it and do your research, starting with Daniel 9. Nevertheless, I do want to spend some time covering the timeline below. As you can see, this timeline is a revelation of Daniel's 70th week. Ergo, it reveals the timing of the Great Tribulation. And it is not only supported by scriptures, these are authentic historical events. Vis-a-vis, the war between Israel and Rome did happen, and it began in the year 66 CE. 7 years later, the war ended at the fall of Masada. Here lies the first point of confirmation, for a prophetic week is 7 years, and this war lasted exactly 7 years. Not only this, but the siege and destruction of Jerusalem occurred in 70 CE, i.e., in the middle of the prophetic week. My dear friends, this is perfectly aligned with Daniel's prophecy, and it reveals why there was an end to sacrifices and offerings. Here again, I would advise you to bookmark this timeline and do your research, for these are matters of truth you must believe if you are to receive the revelation of these last days. Now, as critical as this truth is, I would be remiss if I did not provide you with a warning concerning the most common reason why many fall into error concerning this prophecy, as well as others. Consider this matter carefully and remember it always. The primary reason why many fail to understand a word of prophecy is because they are operating outside of the guidelines, and thus they are forced to lean unto their own limited understanding and apart from the Spirit, for these guidelines have been established by Elohim. Now, in the case of Daniel's 70 weeks, many will waste countless hours trying to figure out when all the events in this prophecy occurred, without considering the boundaries within the prophecy, i.e., the 7 guidelines. As for us, we see clearly how the leading verse in this prophecy establishes all 7 guidelines. And by constraining ourselves to these guidelines, we guard ourselves from error and from misinterpreting the remainder of the prophecy. Now, if you're wondering when we will go through the exercise of finding the season, I have news for you. We just did, albeit the exercise was a bit different than the one we executed in our exposition of the rapture theory. To wit, we didn't go season by season to determine where we could potentially place this prophecy. No, my friends, we took the shortcut. We defined the prophecy and we validated its season by following the 7 guidelines. Here again, my intent is to move quickly with these podcasts from now and into the future. I do mean it. The time is truly at hand. Look, whereas I could spend hours proving these matters to you, the Spirit has not led me to, for He is the driving force for the urgency and brevity I will be speaking with going forward. It is for the following reason, amongst others. Those who are truly being led by the Spirit do not need me to spend hours proving any of these matters, for you already have the mind and the heart to believe. And if you believe, I want you to focus on one final matter before I end the teaching portion of this podcast. I want you to focus on the laws of times and seasons. And I want you to focus on these last days. Now, ask yourself the following question. Would Yahuwah surely reserve the greatest tribulation in the history of the world at the same time he is raising up the renewed nation? Remember, Israel is the audience. Ergo, the great tribulation is for Israel. Thus, I ask again, would Yahuwah raise us up in these last days to be restored to life and simultaneously send tribulation to bring about our death? Brothers and sisters, it would be like having summer and winter in the same season. It is not possible, for the purpose behind restoration is not the same purpose behind tribulation. And in accordance with the laws of times and seasons, a season cannot be founded upon 2 contradicting purposes. Therefore, it is not possible to have restoration and at the same time have tribulation, not for the same audience, not for the same people. Herein lies the key and the problem. Namely, our Bibles don't read that way. Therefore, the next matter we must address is the textual error that has led many astray concerning this crucial prophecy. And we will address it in the next podcast. We will reveal the scriptures in which tribulation was used in error. And in doing so, we will harden our case concerning the time of the great distress. Now, here is the final word. The truth is bright and plain to see if we are where we ought to be. This line will come to mean more to you as we continue this mini-series on the Great Tribulation. Trust me, you'll be glad when the light breaks, and the truth of these matters is clear. For there is no tribulation reserved for the chosen elect, and we've nothing now to fear. Now, here is today's assignment. Meditate on the word you have heard today, and as always, ask the Father to reveal the truth to you. For the children of Elohim live by conviction, and if he has not convicted you, or if you had not heard him concerning these matters, you should pray until you do. Specifically, I want you to meditate on the purpose of these last days. I want you to focus on the season of sealing we are currently in. And then ask yourself the following question: is Yahuwah sealing us so that we can endure 7 years of the greatest tribulation in the history of the world? Is that his purpose for his people in these last days? Is it really? Find the answer to this question, my friend, and the Spirit will lead you from there. And be prepared to get back at it, for we will pick up where we left off in 2 days. For there is yet much we have to say. Now, here is what's next. We completed today's podcast, End Times 290, The Truth About the Great Tribulation, Part 1. And the next podcast is entitled End Times 292, The Truth About the Great Tribulation, Part 2. I will post this podcast on Wednesday, June 19th, 2024. Until then, my friends, continue to be led by the Spirit of Elohim. Continue to watch. Continue to pray. Continue in fasting. And most of all, continue to be focused. For the end is coming. The end is near.